For tonight's worship video, or connection point, as someone called it recently, I like that. These are worship connection points. For tonight, I'd like to go back in time and reflect on a worship service held at Rainbow on August 12, 2018. Several things were going on that Sunday. Raylene Hines Penner from Topeka, a member of Southern Hills Mennonite Church, was our guest preacher. She had just returned from a U.S.-Mexico border trip organized by Mennonite Central Committee. Her sermon title was "Fear Makes Us Crazy. Put on the Armor of Faith." Her scripture focus was Ephesians 6:10-20. In her opening remarks, she asked these questions. When did the very human act of migration, what we have done throughout human existence, become criminalized? How did we get to the point in the U.S. that we don't recognize the difference between a narco-terrorist and a desperate refugee? How did we get to the point that we treat anyone who wants to cross our border as someone who has come to harm us? She had just read Emma Lazarus's poem, The New Colossus, published in 1903. She read from that poem these words: "A mighty woman with a torch, whose flame is the imprisoned lightning, and her name, Mother of Exiles. From her beacon hand glows worldwide welcome. Her mild eyes command." That morning, there was also a statement in our news notes noting that our Mennonite Church USA Executive Director, Glenn Guyton, had just signed, on behalf of our denomination, had signed an ecumenical multi-faith statement condemning government separation of immigration families, or immigrant families. Well, on August 12, 2018, we also had another guest. Really, she is familiar to many. Christina Yoder was with us. Christina grew up as daughter of Russell and Charlene Yoder, grew up coming to Rainbow. She is now the violinist in the Pittsburgh Symphony Orchestra. She was there to share one of her mother, Charlene's, favorite pieces of music, Meditation from Thais. It first premiered in 1894. The piece is extraordinary. It's 5 or maybe 6 minutes long, depending on how you play it. It's this great encore piece. Has such a dramatic midpoint. We're going to hear it actually at the end of this recording. First, I want to talk just a little bit about what happened when Christina Yoder got up to share this piece of music. I believe it was after Raylene spoke. This was the point in the service where we were called into a spirit of prayer. You'll notice here in this footage, thanks to Phil Rhodes, we have some footage. You'll notice Christina's daughter. Not quite sure if she wanted her mother to go up front and leave her behind. Her daughter was experiencing the stress of the moment, the stress of this brief separation. He ended up following Christina to the front, and what followed was a rather breathtaking, exhilarating moment in the Rainbow Sanctuary. Christina's daughter basically twirled around her for most of the entire piece, would rest a few times here and there and then twirl some more, sometimes reaching up for her, sometimes pulling her mother's dress. All the while, Christina stayed focused on the music. She never once hit her daughter with the bow, which was no small feat. Raylene Heinz-Penner, who was our guest speaker that morning, was sitting behind me, and I remember her whispering something like, "That's beautiful." I wrote to Raylene this week to see if I remembered correctly, and she said, quote, "Oh my goodness, I would never forget that beautiful, touching playing of Meditation from Thais. I so remember both mother and child of a kind of New World Madonna tableau, utterly breathtaking." End quote. I think actually many people said they didn't breathe that entire 5-6 minutes. It will be interesting to see how Christina's own relationship to this particular performance changes with time. I certainly do not want to minimize the stress she was under that morning and what must have been going through her mind in terms of what was best to do or not do in that moment. I certainly admire her commitment to playing on. And it was really incredible by the end. We don't quite capture this in the video, but by the end of the music or end of the piece, her daughter was sitting quietly at her feet and remained up there as people applauded.
Ruth asked me to share a reflection that I wrote to her just a few days after this worship service. I was actually sitting on the organ bench while Christina played, so I was very near the action. But I was watching through the mirror on the organ, so I saw the backside of what was happening. And I didn't even see Christina's daughter until she started moving around Christina, and I realized by that time there was really nothing I should do to interrupt. So this is what I wrote to Ruth a few days later. I will offer that it was a remarkable worship experience. I've known Christina since she was 5, and even as a child, Christina grew a new persona with a violin in her hand. I knew that she chose to play this piece on this day because she was visiting her parents and it was her mother's favorite piece. As a performing musician, I know what it's like to deal with distraction. Christina's ability to hold the moment was one of the most amazing I have ever seen. For a while as she played, I closed my eyes to block out the chaos going on around her. But near the end, I found myself watching, enthralled by Christina's ability to be aware enough of her daughter to not hit her with the bow, and she had to change some of her bowings to do it, and yet maintain the intense musical ethos of the piece. It was obvious that it would not have been helpful for any of us to try to distract or contain her daughter. She was as focused on her mother as her mother was focused on the music. There would be easy analogies to make about being calm while the storm rages around, or keeping one's focus on what's most important and ignoring everything else. But what I saw was Christina being aware of the chaos and adjusting to not let it derail her. The music was so internalized for her that short of the bow coming out of her hand, there was no stopping her. Afterwards, she was a bit embarrassed by her daughter's actions and surprised because it was out of character, but also matter of fact. She offered her best despite the distraction. And I will say that 2 years later, watching the video again, I find the same reflection comes to me.